And welcome to another episode of Tiger Territory, part of the Foul Territory Network, a Detroit Tigers podcast. I'm Kieran Steckley. With me, as always, is a man who, as a kid, thought the Tigers mascot was named Tony. He is Cody Stavenhagen. How you doing?
Thought you said I had a kid for a second. I was like, not that I know of. Yeah, that's all I got on that one. Tony the Tiger, really one of the all-time great mascots, I will say.
For sure. Stood the test of time, and I can speak personally, being Tigers and Lions and even Pistons with Hooper, Red Wings with the Octopuses. It's been an easy sell for my animal-loving girlfriend, now wife, to be rooting for these teams. She loves Paw, she loves Rory, she loves Hooper. I think I got a pillow pet of the Red Wings octopus. That was one of the first gifts I got her when we first started dating. So shout out to the Detroit teams for making it really easy on me. Uh, Moving on to more current topics. We're recording this a couple days before the World Series is to begin, Cody. And, with the Tigers making a little bit of a postseason run and our focus being pretty singular, we haven't really talked a lot about the postseason at large. First of all, why don't you just kind of give your opinion? Because obviously you were at several games, all of them that involving the Tigers, and then watching these great moments on TV. I think it's been a stellar postseason. I am afraid I might be biased because the Tigers had several nice moments there, but you're the impartial observer here. What have you made about the postseason so far? Just in general, I think it's been good for the game.
Yeah, no, I think it's been one of the better postseasons in recent memory in terms of just even, the wild card series, the division series, the NLCS and ALCS had some really good matchups. I think, some of the final games there ended up being a little bit anticlimactic, but still really good baseball. I think kind of the dividing topic in the sport is like, is Yankees Dodgers good for the game or is it not good for the game? Uh, Personally, I mean, I would have loved to see, the vaunted like Guardians, Brewers, or like, just some random World Series. I'd be all for that. But in terms of like the platform for the sport, look, this is what MLB wants, and I don't think you can really argue with that. They have probably their two biggest stars in Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge in the postseason. They have their two biggest markets and two longtime major brands playing each other in World Series for the first time since 1981. As a fan of the sport, I'm actually all for it. I'm excited to see who comes away with the crown here in the World Series.
Yeah, and then there's the Juan Soto element. There's the Mookie Betts element. Dave Roberts is no stranger to postseason fame, if you would, and 20-year anniversary of his. I don't know what day it was, but that run, the 20-year anniversary of his famous
20 years ago. Wow.
Yeah, famous stolen base that capped off or started, I should say, the greatest comeback in arguably team sports history. So that's all great, and I feel old watching the coverage with Poppy and Jeter and A-Rod kind of leading it. It's like, man, I remember going to the games watching those guys. I agree. It's been a lot of fun. I think this is baseball. They're supposed to be impartial, but this is what the TV networks wanted. They don't have to be impartial. This is exactly what they were aiming for, and it is interesting as I reflect on it kind of here in the moment. You had a lot of fun stories with young teams. Obviously, the Tigers one of them, but Kansas City fits that profile. Baltimore fits that profile. That they kind of reach this level, and then like kind of the adults in the room took over, and I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. That's actually a good thing because you want to see the fans want to see the journeys. You know what I mean? You get here, then you get here, then you get here. So I think that's also good overall for the game as well. You end up with the matchups that you want if you're the TV networks or Major League Baseball, but at the same time, you also got a lot of, for lack of a better term, free publicity for these, the next guys in the game. So I think that is very healthy postseason, I think might be the best way I phrase it. And, there's not a lot of Tigers connections between these two teams, but there is a glaring one. And I don't know if this will make it into the national narrative, but one of my first thoughts was this is a World Series between a team that acquired Jack Flaherty and a team that could have acquired Jack Flaherty from the Tigers. We talked about it at the time. We've mentioned that this narrative that this trade with the Dodgers with Flaherty wasn't the quote unquote backup plan. Scott vehemently denied it. You could argue as of right now, those words have proven valid given Sweeney's impact and Liranzo's promise in a short time with the organization. We'll talk about him a little bit later too. Do you think you? I won't ever know. The fans will never know. Will you ever know the return that could have been had from the Yankees for Jack Flaherty? Is that gonna leak any time?
Probably, I would say probably not. I have heard one of the names that was involved, and I'm not going to say it because it wasn't 1,000% confirmed, and I don't think it's really in either team's interest to leak those names. Like it could make either team look bad. That's the reason these failed deals don't really get out to the public very often. I mean, I've certainly heard like what the Tigers could have had for Erod and like, but that's never been officially reported. And you kind of can't, like the top executives aren't going to say like, oh yeah, that was it. You can run with that. That's just not something the teams want out there. I imagine it will be somewhat shrouded in mystery forever.
Well, what could have been, and again, maybe it was. For all we know, what if it was a on paper better return, and then Sweeney turns into X, and Liranzo turns into X, and it's like sort of door number 2 was the better door all along. It could be one of those things. So very interesting. But with Flaherty, we'll get to his numbers here in a second. He was one of the headline makers of the postseason early on because in the division series. I mean, he had the combination, which will always bring attention in some way, of getting shelled and then also talking smack. So he was involved in some verbal disputes, I guess you could say, with Manny Machado, himself no stranger to personality, I would say. And I was kind of curious. This is a guy that you have interacted with on a regular basis from February on until obviously he was traded. You've seen him go from this, kind of, I want to say middling in terms of just like kind of trying to figure out his stuff and then looking like an all-star caliber pitcher. And then with the team at the time kind of cratering a little bit, then it became this like, this he's going to get traded narrative. You're talking to a guy who's on a temporary visa essentially for the Tigers clubhouse, and then the trade happened. So him a little bit, I would imagine. When you see Flaherty getting into little spats like that, or in that moment you're watching on TV, what's kind of going through your mind?
Kind of just laughing because I love stuff like that. You talk about good for the game. Let's see some personality. Let's see some emotion. Let's have a fight or two. We don't get many fights anymore. When are the Tigers going to get in a fight? Come on, let's go. In terms of Jack, like, he's I think an interesting character in the game. I think there are pretty split opinions on him through the game. Like I said, when he came to the Tigers, he didn't necessarily have the best reputation across the league. I mean, media wise, he's not one of the easier guys to deal with all the time, but you talk to him, you kind of keep going. And there's a little bit of a Nick Castellanos factor where it's like, no, this is a interesting guy, maybe a little bit misunderstood. He definitely never seemed like as vocal or verbose as you saw when he was yelling at Machado. So that was a side of him I hadn't seen before. But I know he's definitely, ultra intense, ultra competitive. He's someone, he's a union leader with the league. And since this is a Tigers podcast and we barely talked about the Tigers, I think since we're talking about Flaherty, it brings it up naturally. Is it worth trying to run it back with Jack? Could the Tigers return, bring Jack Flaherty back to Detroit this winter? Tough to say. He's raised his market so much. Then again, it's just one good year. Like, what kind of contract does he get? Is he going to get 360, 480? Is that too high? I almost think no. And if he gets that kind of money, I'm not sure that's the commitment the Tigers are going to be looking for. But at the same time, we've heard, hey, yeah, Jack liked his time in Detroit and all that. I think it's an interesting idea to at least keep an eye on this winter. Not something I would be opposed to in terms of constructing the team, but it all comes down to the almighty dollar.
It does, and I repeat myself, because he is such an important ranking member of the union, he is not going to take any
Mm-hmm.
discount for anybody. It doesn't do
Mm-hmm.
him doesn't do the greater good for him to take any discount. He's got to go where the top dollar is, because he's not setting a market, but you know what I mean? Like he's got to be part of setting the market. And I was thinking, because I remember even back when JD Martinez was traded, there was like, it's just Twitter, so I'm not trying to make it like sound more serious than it is, but there was like, oh well, what if the Tigers brought him back after trading him to Arizona? That was like naivety about the state of the team, but you understand, like every time someone gets traded in a contract year, the automatic thought is like, well,
Right.
could you bring him back? And I
You
don't
don't
have it.
actually see that
I
happen.
was about to, yeah, I can't really think of any example. I'm sure some example exists in some of these team sports, but you don't really see it. And I think part of it, well, we'll say like typical for baseball, part of it is that like if you're making a trade like that, it's probably an indictment of where you're at as a team. And so therefore that guy's probably not going to want to go back into that same situation. But we have here a unique circumstance where the Tigers were rebuilding and sellers, and now they are a multiple round playoff team looking to add starting pitching. So I almost wager if there was a situation for it to happen, this would be that. And I would also probably say that if the Tigers don't make any serious play for Jack Flaherty when it's clear there's like interest and price is no issue, supposedly, I wonder if that validates any concerns about his back. I'm just saying that will be like a narrative,
Oh, hey.
because if I was another team, got a telemarketer calling me. Come on, dude, I'm doing a podcast. If I was a team that was looking at Jack Flaherty and I wasn't involved in the trade discussions at all, so therefore I didn't get any sort of medical, and that like the Dodgers aren't interested, the Yankees aren't interested, the Tigers aren't interested. Like that would be the first question I would ask my president of baseball operations. Like, is there something we don't know? Is what would come to my mind. Whether that's fair or not, that's something that would come to my mind. And I think he's healthy now. That I'm gonna say that I think he's healthy, and then his postseason numbers, he's pitched just over 15 innings, giving up 12 earned runs, 8 Ks to 7 strikeouts. So it's nothing crazy there. But also for whatever it's worth, and how much this means, like they've had to really rely on him because they've been depleted of starting pitching
Oh
health,
yeah.
and he's been one of their more. Yeah, again, I just laid the numbers out there. It's not impressive, but it's like one of their more relied on guys in the pitching staff.
Yeah, I mean, I think his back is an interesting kind of ongoing topic. Clearly, the Dodgers felt comfortable enough with the medicals to trade for him, and sure enough, he has been healthy. I remember, I mean, it was almost feels like a million years ago, but remember the trade deadline? He had 2 injections in the back. It was like, what if they don't move him and then he gets hurt? Then the Tigers are totally screwed. Scott Harris is a moron. Like it was going to be the end of the world. Flaherty goes to Los Angeles. No one's really talked about the back. He's pitched really well. But it's worth reminding, like there is a lot at stake for Jack Flaherty to not tell anyone if the back starts aching a little bit. There is, and this is also important when it comes to his free agency. This is his real shot at a payday. This is probably going to be, the prime free agent years of his career. This most likely the biggest contract he is ever going to get. So, yeah, if I were Jack, I would not mention anything about the back unless things were really, really dire. But I think based on what he did in the second half of the regular season, I think that's great for his market. I think it's enough to alleviate any potential concerns that could have been lingering there.
Just as I said last week in regards to, or not last week, a couple days ago, in regards to George Lombard, and like I'm not going to root against somebody for advancing in their career if that's what they want to do. I'm also not rooting for like I'm not going to blame somebody for trying to maximize their economic income potential, right? So like
Absolutely.
if he wants it, so that's another important context here is that like this is a guy who probably wasn't. I'm sure he was always sure of himself, but the situation that he found himself in was there was no guarantee that he was gonna be some like key trade deadline name float around, and B that he was gonna be in a position to get a multi-year deal with 8 figures or whatever. So like like what's on the table right now. So good on him. I'm happy for him. Uh, I also think here we go talking about payroll again. I also kind of think that this would be more of like the Tigers are going to get more creative. I figure with adding to the starting rotation than going back to the well of Jack Flaherty. Like that just seems a little bit more of the MO. So you can't argue with the results. Michael Lorenzen, All-Star, traded, and Jack Flaherty really could have been an All-Star. Probably would have been their All-Star, honestly, if there was like a team 2 years ago where it's like we got to choose somebody, everybody's hurt, blah blah. Like you could have easily filled him in there. I just feel like they're looking forward, not looking back. But
I think you're probably right. If there's some kind of world in which the market tanks, which I don't know, would probably only happen if there were actually injury concerns. But if you could get him for like 345, like I would think long and hard about doing that. But I bet he gets more than that and goes somewhere else.
And just to tie it back to our last episode, and that conversation continues on X, and it will until there's some resolution. Would you rather do whatever you anticipate the market is? And by the way, there's projections on the Athletic, so if you're a subscriber, you can go look at this stuff. Like whatever the projection is for Flaherty, you'd rather do that than a Verlander reunion, and what could also be a costly situation depending.
I mean, I think you always got to be aware if you're talking like 4 or 5 years with Flaherty, but generally speaking, I like bring back Flaherty more than I do bring back Verlander. Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. So we'll see. I imagine there's a Rolodex of 25 guys at the front office of the Tigers has an idea of like, all right, this guy's got this one elite tool, and we're just gonna run that into the ground basically. And by the way, I will be interested to see like how they approach it in general, because again, like part of the expectation now is to have a little bit more serious of an offseason. I'm talking about national expectation as much as local. And bringing back Jack Flaherty would obviously check that box. So, forever that's worth. Let's go present and future here a little bit, kind of thread the needle. We didn't talk about this. MLB.com had named their pitcher and position player, minor league pitcher and position player of the year for each team. And the awards were given to one guy that I think Tigers fans, you certainly are great listeners here at Tiger Territory, and are pretty familiar with. And another one that's kind of like come on strong a little bit. I'm not comparing the two, but like if you remember, like when like all of a sudden Skubal was this name that you kept kind of hearing, or even Carpenter is like this name you kept kind of hearing. That would be Jaden Hamm, pitcher, and then Kevin McGonigle, the prospect that's really on everybody's radar since he was drafted. So I'm not gonna lie, I don't really know that much about Hamm. He was drafted last year. And I know like Tigers minor league report has done a good mock up on him, so I would recommend everybody go read that, listen to their stuff. In general, those are good guys. But could the Tigers have something here? 5th round pick, like still kind of obviously really new to the organization. Maybe it's a guy that we got to have better on our radar.
No, he's very much put himself on the radar. There's a guy who's a 5th round pick, so he was drafted much higher than Bo Brisky, who's a 27th round pick. But I think just kind of the profile seems a little Brisky-esque. And you've seen him already make big strides since he's in pro ball. I think Scooble was an uber talent who, because of playing in Seattle and having an injury, was just a little overlooked. I think Hamm's a good pitcher who the Tigers and Hamm himself have already helped improve. Basically went from just throwing fastballs at the knees in college to now riding that vert fastball at the top of the zone. He's added a slider to a mix that I believe already included a curve and a change. He's had a lot of success with that pitch, added more movement, I think, on all his stuff. Really successful first year in the Tigers farm system for Jaden Hamm, topped out, at High A West Michigan. One of those guys you're going to be really interested to see, A, does he make it to big league camp? And if so, like, him and Kevin McGonigle as well, like two guys my eyes are going to be glued on in spring training, because I haven't really seen much, if any of them, with my own eyes yet, but they tore up the lower rungs of the minors and real quick have become very serious prospects for the Tigers. Hamm, obviously, a little more unexpected than McGonigle, but that's the type of guy that good systems turn into a solid major league pitcher, whatever his role may end up being. And Hamm's in position to do that. Big leagues next year might be a stretch, but the way people are talking about him, it sounds like he's not far from being a mature, well-rounded pitcher.
Number 7 on MLB.com's prospect rankings for the Tigers, just forever that's worth. And number 3, behind only Jackson Jobe and Max Clark, is McGonigle. And I'm not gonna pretend like I've watched film on this guy, but you understood the prospect report, and then everything he's kind of continued to do. I love the him and Clark tie, through the system. That's really fun. And McGonigle, he seems like for the level, I'm not saying there's not improvement there, but about as polished as you would want a prospect at this level to be at the plate. You look at his numbers, he hit 309 getting up to West Michigan, and check this out: 46 walks, 28 strikeouts. I mean, if that's not a guy, if that's not a guy that dominates the strike zone, I don't know what is. And he has this question, because if you look at, again, his profile, it says shortstop / second base. So that's the number one thing that everyone goes to, because there's a little bit of a Colt Keith element where everyone kind of tracks the bat to go. No evaluator is having that big of questions about the bat. So then it's where is he going to play defensively? And it would be cool to see this bat at a good defensive shortstop, position in Comerica Park.
Yeah,
sometimes that's asking for too much, though. So I don't know.
Yeah. Again, one of those things I'm going to be glued on in spring training is just watching this guy take grounders at short. How does he actually look? How's the arm play? I get the sense the Tigers are going to try to make this work. I mean, they just drafted Bryce Rayner, who you hope is your shortstop for the future, but I think he's also going to be viewed as a little bit more raw. Didn't actually play after he was drafted, had a little bit of a hamstring injury that contributed to that. I mean, he's going to be fine, nothing to be concerned about, but kind of worth noting. I think the organization is going to view Rayner as just having a little bit of a longer developmental timeline, and not in a bad way. It's just, that's kind of how he is. Whereas McGonigle, like you said, polished is a very good word, at least, kind of a word I've heard from multiple people just regarding his bat, more polished, ready, maybe than even Max Clark, in terms of just the pure hit tool. That's going to serve McGonigle very well, and the Tigers are going to have plenty of incentive to at least try to make it work at shortstop. When you start talking about move him to second, then what do you do with Colt Keith? Well, I guess you move Colt Keith to first, but what if you and so we have we start projecting 3-4 years out, and look, we do that. It's the off season. It's fun to talk about. Those conversations almost always end up being silly. These things do just work themselves out and something unexpected happens. But kind of interesting to note what's going on in the Arizona Fall League right now, where Josue Briceño is tearing it up. And this guy who we were talking about in spring training, can he stick behind the plate at catcher? Well, now the Tigers have Thayron Liranzo, who's playing catcher. And Briceño in the Arizona Fall League has played only first base and some DH. Listed only as a first baseman. So that's kind of highly interesting if you want to play the foolish game of what will the Tigers look like in 5 years?
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it'll work itself out. It's the question for me, and we'll get to the Arizona Fall League here in a second. The question for me is like, did how hard do you force might be not the right word. How hard do you like kind of make shortstop a priority here? And this question will apply to these guys we're going to talk about here in a second. But like I how like if he is not what you want as a major league shortstop and his bat is good enough and he's in the big leagues, like how much would like struggling at shortstop defensively like affect his confidence? Like these are the kind of things that are like going through my mind. So like part of me almost would this is so dumb. He's 20 years old. He's got plenty of time. But part of me is kind of like, I hope there's like a plan where it's like, eventually we're just going to kind of go here with in regards to McGonigle and then kind of figure the rest out. They have shown the ability to pivot on guys. Obviously, Cole Keith came up as a third baseman. Jace Young came up as a second baseman. So like, I'm sure this will like play, like I said, play itself out. But part of me is like, it might just be better to ease himself in if you do think he's a shortstop at the second base position or, third or, something, because even Bobby Witt was getting time at second base when he first came up and he I would say he had defensive questions coming up, but no one was like there was an anticipation like we might have to move him from shortstop when he first came up. So like these are all things that are part of it.
Royals still playing like Adalberto Mondesi at shortstop at that point in time, probably.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so Mondesi's a great at one point he was the next big Royals prospect,
Mm-hmm.
and to the point where it's like, oh, maybe Bobby Witt's got to play second. Like, what a ridiculous conversation that looks like now. But a question I did get in my mailbag, like, could McGonigle or Clark debut next year? Because this was brought up because I was like, I'm not sure if Jace Young and Jackson Jobe will play in 2024 in Detroit, and that sure enough they both did. But I'll say what I said in my mailbag on The Athletic, like, especially given they are both prep hitters, just seems highly unlikely. For as polished as McGonigle is, like, these are guys who haven't really touched Double A yet. To play two levels, the two hardest levels of the minors, and debut in the majors next year. Look, I guess nothing's impossible, but it would require a truly spectacular year, I think, for either of those guys to get up to the big leagues at age 20. Would seem, I guess maybe we have some different evidence now, but would still seem pretty un-Scott Harris-like. I would say any world in which that happens is which these guys go from like, oh, pretty good prospects to like, oh, this could be one of the next stars in the game. That's the type of year it would take from either of them. So I wouldn't get my hopes up for that.
It would be awesome.
It
would would be the result of like one of the cooler moments you could have as a fan. It's like, oh, we got this prospect so high, like he has to come into the majors barely out of his teenage years, but it just doesn't happen that often. That's why it's very hard. It's very hard to be a Major League Baseball player. And then again, like how often, if you're going to improve your lineup, like a lot of fans want, like where are the spots? And you already have so many young players. Like where are the spots for them anyway? You can play yourself into a lot of directions there. But let's get to Briceño and Liranzo. So I'm just gonna read a couple stats, just a couple.
Sure.
Briceño in the Arizona Fall League, 1.514 OPS.
Pretty good.
Liranzo, 1.289. Briceño number 1 in the whole AFL. Liranzo number 4. I feel like every time I see something on X, it's like these guys just like hitting the cover off the ball. And then, we talk about the McGonigle thing. I was like, man, the Tigers have this like, they just have like a supply of bats that I can get really excited for. Like, it seems like there's a lot of possibility here. And again, I have unfairly playing out in my mind. I'm like, okay, so how if Liranzo's bat just keeps kind of going this direction, how long do we stick with the like how do we delay his bat if his bat's major league ready at a certain point, not this year, but maybe, or not like next year, but maybe like in 2 years or something like that. If his bat's major league ready, but he still has to learn how to catch, like especially for a manager like AJ Hinch. Like are we like is his profile is going to be here and then here? Like we're gonna like how often do you hold on to the catcher thing? I don't know. These are just questions I think. Like every time I see him smack the ball, I'm like, am I gonna have to wait an extra year to see him do this in the major leagues because he's learning the hardest position there is on the field? You know?
Yeah, like especially for Liranzo, that's kind of a legit question. You know, some of the videos that came out of him playing catcher as soon as he got to the Tigers were like, "Oof." But got to take note that some of the reviews have become pretty good. Keith Law was raving about his arm strength. You know, catcher does have a harder developmental timeline. It wasn't all that long ago. Dylan Dingler was promoted to Erie at the same time as Spencer Torkelson and Riley Green. Arrived to the big leagues, 2 years later than those guys, basically, because catcher is just hard. But I think Liranzo, regardless of what happens with his defensive profile, is always going to be treated a little bit more as a bat first guy. It seems like the bat might just be pretty advanced. Briceño, I mean, gosh, this guy did not play above Lakeland last year, and he's just tearing up the fall league. You do have to put these things, like take them with a grain of salt. 2 offseasons ago, Joey Wentz dominated the Arizona Fall League. So, but I think that's interesting. Wentz had already pitched in the big leagues, I believe, and then went to the AFL. He was facing more inferior hitters than he had, the best he had faced. Briceño's facing probably better pitching than he's ever faced. Liranzo's facing as good, if not better, pitching than he's ever faced. And these guys are tearing it up. Still small samples, but I think that gives them, makes what they're doing a little more enticing just because they're so young and it's not like they're seeing a decline in stuff right now. Like I said, with Briceño, especially maybe an uptick. This guy didn't play above Lakeland. That's great.
Yeah, well, we've reached this will be something we'll discuss later in the off season, but we've reached a very interesting time with the Tigers where you have an overall health rating, major and farm system, as better than it's been. I mean, I will go back and kind of look, but better than it's been in a long time, because even those Dombrowski years, like, what's he known for? It's not for building farm systems,
right?
So it's a nice little combination in Detroit right now. And by the way, like, it should, like, even if you got to take it with a grain of salt, you should like be excited to kind of see these guys like rake in all these opportunities, because these are live reps. They're taking advantage of opportunities, and the fact that they're out there means that they are getting better. Like, that's like, there's only one way to get better, and that's by doing, right? So, like, this should be a little bit of a source of pride if you follow the Tigers farm system and you're like, all right, I got to keep in mind about this guy, because, you might hear him sooner rather than later, sooner than you think. And then it gives us good fodder to be like, is Renzo a catcher? Briceño, what's he going to do? And, McGonigle, is he a shortstop? And, Rayner, like, they're going to move him in the outfield eventually. Like, like all these things. Max Clark. Like,
we're not that far from we got to trade all the prospects now. For so many years, gosh, we got to get more prospects, trade for prospects. Now, welcome to Mike Elias's world. You have all these good young players. What are you going to do with them? You can't, there probably won't be room for them all, but I think some will sort themselves out and some won't. And so I would just say hold off a little bit on the sell all the prospects talk, because that also doesn't seem very Scott Harris like. I think they're going to try to let all this young talent accumulate and then, kind of separate the wheat from the chaff there and see what happens.
I'm always down to give friendly advice to Scott Harris, friend of the podcast. Hit up Sam Presti in Oklahoma City and be like, hey, how do you manage all these assets? Sam Presti's been doing it for years. I think be a good little sounding board,
If only you could trade for first round picks like 3 or 4 years out in MLB. I feel like Scott might be into it.
I think it would. I think, hey, it makes it, people are obsessed. NBA fans are obsessed with that stuff. It would be good. It'd be good interest. I can't believe they gave up a 5th rounder for this guy. All right. Well, that's some good talk there, Cody. Good talk there, Cody. Anything else you want to get into before we get out of here?
No, I think we're all set. Looking forward to watching the World Series this week, and we're not that far away from hot stove season officially kicking off with the conclusion of the World Series.
It's a very short off season. It gets short. It feels like it gets shorter every year. And by the way, love it. Good for us, and good for you if you subscribe to The Athletic, which you should. You can read all of Cody's great work. Please subscribe to Tiger Territory wherever you get podcasts, as well as YouTube and the social medias, including X, formerly known as Twitter. Cody is at Cody Stavenhagen. I am at Kieran_Steckley. Pod page is at Tiger Territory _ YouTube, Instagram, all that stuff. We are there, and we love interacting with all of you. We appreciate everybody who listens, who made the move over from turning the corner into now Tiger Territory. And I say this all the time, but we're just getting started. So thank you, everybody, for listening to us, even though it is the off season, and we promise to do our best to deliver a good product for you. So for Cody Stavenhagen, I am Kieran Steckley. Everybody have a great day.